We are delighted to welcome Professor Janet Stewart, who is the Executive Dean at the Faculty of Arts and Humanities here at Durham University, for an interview to celebrate International Women's Day as part of our Ustinov Meets series. The theme for International Women's Day this year is Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World, with the tagline, Choose to Challenge. And we're very pleased to welcome Janet to speak about her experience and career to date.
Tidro, thank you very much. Thank you very much for welcoming me, and I'm very delighted to be here with you.
Thank you so much for talking to us today and for making the time for this activity as part of International Women's Day. Could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career to date?
Yeah, delighted to. So I'm currently, as you said, Executive Dean for the Faculty of Arts and Humanities here in Durham. I've been in Durham now since 2014. And I joined Durham initially to pick up a role where I was developing the new Centre for Visual Arts and Culture, which I did together with Ludmila Georgianova, who's another extraordinary woman in leadership and someone that I've always looked up to in terms of ways that she's worked and the ways in which she's mentored younger scholars as well. We, amongst other activities there, we set up a doctoral training centre for visual culture funded by Leverhulme. So that was a really interesting set of activities that we were able to put in place. But quite soon after that, for various reasons, I then picked up the job of head of school of the School of Modern Languages and Cultures. It's an extraordinary School of Modern Languages and Cultures here in Durham, one of the largest in the country, very successful, a great privilege to lead the school. It hadn't been on my career plan at that stage to take that role on. I had moved to Durham explicitly to pick up a research centre job, but actually a job that I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the job because of the opportunities that affords you actually to help others and enable visions to be realised. So actually, sometimes a frustrating job, always a busy job, but actually quite an interesting one. At the end of that, I then found myself thinking, what did I want to do next? And the role of Executive Dean for the faculty emerged, and it seemed like a very good opportunity to continue doing some of the things that I really like doing. Prior to that, what got me to Durham prior to that, I'd spent about 15 years plus in Aberdeen, which was my first job as a lecturer and then senior lecturer in German and visual arts and film. And before that, then I'd done a PhD and also a BA in Glasgow, and had spent time at various institutions internationally, including International Research Centre for Cultural Studies in Cultural Sciences in Vienna, and also a year in Tübingen as well. So there you go. There's a potted biography.
Thank you. Thank you so much. International Women's Day in 2021 focuses on women in leadership. And I wanted to ask, what does the tagline for this year, Choose to Challenge, what does this mean to you personally and professionally?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? I wanted to answer it in two ways. On the one hand, it's choose to not be afraid of challenge. And that's one of the things that's really important to me, is to recognize actually that the things that challenge us are the things that stimulate us. That actually we shouldn't be afraid of the things that we think are difficult or might take more effort, or where we might not think that we're actually in a position to be able to do something. So not to be afraid of pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones. That's part of what I think I would take from that. I always teach every teenage daughter, I always teach her as well, not to shy away from the things that she finds difficult, but actually to have a go. But that actually means not to be afraid of challenge. It also means then to not be afraid of failure, because some things won't work out, and that's all right. That's absolutely all right. If we're not afraid to be challenged and not afraid of challenge, then we also have to be not afraid for things sometimes to not work out as planned or differently. Always fine. And the other aspect to the question of choose to challenge is, of course, not to be afraid to challenge. So really important. If things are not yet as good as they could be, if there are things that we see in our professional lives or in our private lives where we think, I don't really like how that's being done, or that could be done differently, or that should be done differently for particular reasons, then not to be afraid to actually step up and say, why do we continue to do things in one way when actually really it would be much more productive. It would lead to greater equality of opportunity if we were to do things differently. So not being afraid of the challenges that come at us, but also not being afraid to challenge the things that we see that we think could be improved, could be done better.
Oh, thank you. That's really, really insightful. And I think very, very important way of thinking about it. So thank you so much for that answer. I wanted to go on and to say Durham has 4 executive deans, and I believe this is the first time that 4 of these 4 positions are being held by women simultaneously.
Yeah.
What would you consider to be the key opportunities to enable greater representation of female colleagues in senior roles?
Yeah. That's another excellent question there. So the first thing I would say is that I'm very much welcome being part of that team. So we're part of a larger team in terms of the University Executive Committee, which is a great team to be part of, but also that team of 4 of us who hold similar roles within the institution is a very useful place for the exchange of ideas, for us working together, for us to think about questions like the one that you've just posed at the moment. How do we encourage more people to avail themselves of these opportunities to be in a position to actually experience what I'm able to do at the moment? And the answers to that are, well, first of all, is to be clear that we do actually mindfully strive for balance in committees, in positions of representation and positions of responsibility. So that's one of the things that I think is very, very important. That we actually are looking at the constitution of the committees that we have, rather than simply waiting for things to happen by chance. That means that we've also got then an eye to the pipeline. We're actually also thinking about who are the people coming up through departments who are exercising their opportunity to develop leadership skills in, from postgraduate level to organising conferences, to being involved in things that you're involved in Café des Arts and other initiatives, right? And to support those, to make sure that we're there, we're present, we're listening, and we're providing advice where that's welcome. Then to think about what happens to people at early career stage. How do we encourage people to be able to take on the roles that are appropriate at that time, without swamping people with the wrong kinds of roles, but giving people opportunities, allowing them to develop and try things out. Again, it ties back to the choose to challenge as well, doesn't it? It says let's allow people the opportunity to try things out. So I think one of the things I was very lucky to have early in my career in Aberdeen was an opportunity to do things. I set up 2 new degree programs, one at postgraduate level, one at undergraduate level when I was there, and was enabled to do that. And so much of what we can do to get more women into senior roles is to enable more women to engage in leadership activities from early on in their career, and to encourage that all the way through, and to reward that, of course.
Thank you. That's actually something that's quite important to me as a kind of early career researcher and a woman in academia. So yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I really believe that the strides that are being made are really appreciated by everyone. So thank you. I would like now to talk a bit about your research. Was quite interested in your research on the relationship between visual culture and the energy industry. How do you think visual culture and art can help us imagine and visualize a post-fossil fuel world? And can you give a few examples from your own work and with museums?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a really generative area of research, one that I became engaged in because I was living and working in Aberdeen, and you can't move in Aberdeen, but become, you know, involved in thinking around the fossil fuel industry. And, you know, around 10 years ago or so, probably actually, no, around about 10 years ago or so now, I became sort of involved in a group of academics who were thinking about the idea of petroculture. And that emerged, first of all, from a group of academics in Canada. And my own interests, of course, are in museums and visual arts. So trying to think about how these two things come together. I've been involved in a range of different projects that begin to answer the question, but perhaps the best one to answer the question you've posed at the moment is a project I'm involved in at the moment with colleagues from Sweden and then also Warwick and also the Netherlands, and it's called Climaginaries. And it's about a multidisciplinary group of scholars who are thinking about exploring innovative, creative ways of really trying to envisage how the fossil fuel world might look and the means through which that we might arrive at a post-fossil world. And the idea there, I guess, is a response to the idea that, look, the power to think about a transition to a post-fossil world and to govern a transition to a post-fossil world isn't only dependent then on scientific facts and governmental sort of legislative measures, but actually on how to envision how to think about how to imagine post-fossil worlds. And that's what the arts and humanities will help to do. It's about imagining, about thinking about new futures, and it's about stimulating the emotions and stimulating creativity to do so. And we've been thinking about looking at stories. You know, what are the stories about climate futures? Where do they circulate? How do they emerge? How do they emerge in visual form? How do they emerge in textual form? What kinds of stories do we have? What kinds of futures are actually on the table at the moment? What are the possibilities in terms of what we can imagine, and how can one potentially think about transcending or pushing those possibilities? But it's obviously crucially interesting to think about how we're currently imagining what a future might look like, how the ways in which we're imagining a future are constrained by what we understand and know of the presence that we inhabit, of where we are now. So one project that we put in place to try to think through that particular problem, and it's about getting to ideas of impasse as well. You know, we know things should be different, but actually how do we put the action in place to make things become different? So one project we put in place very concretely was a project called Carbon Ruins. And Carbon Ruins is an exhibition. It's an exhibition that has been designed as though it were taking place in 2053. And what we've done is simply put a whole set of objects in place and written the labels for them as though we were actually already in 2053. So here's a lump of coal. People used to heat their homes with this. Here's a small model of a nuclear power station. Here's a Lego model. People used to use Lego. Lego was made of plastic. Here's a Lego model of an oil platform. We used to actually, of course, generate our fuel from the North Sea using oil, which was drilled out of the seabed. So it's a sense of beginning to get stimulating people to utilize the idea of the museum, but to think about that in terms of almost a future-oriented memory approach.
Oh wow, that sounds so amazing.
You can go on if you go on and Google Carbon Ruins, and you'll come to a website that will tell you about that exhibition, will tell you about the kinds of objects, will give you a sense of the different labeling techniques that we use there as one of the examples of the ways in which you might think through that question.
Oh, that's amazing. I'll definitely be having a look at that, because that sounds just incredible. Such a fascinating idea. And really a good way to start looking at things we currently take for granted in our everyday lives that are slowly being phased out.
Absolutely. So my favorite object from that exhibition actually is a pair of tights. And they're just, describing then the nylon of the tights and the way that they cling to people's legs, and just trying to think about, what might that look like if you were to not utilize nylon for that particular item of clothing anymore. But that's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. That's so cool. And pivoting off of that, During the past year, we have heard so much about the role of science and technology in addressing the challenges that we're kind of facing globally, such as obviously the current ongoing global health crisis and climate change. What is your opinion? In your opinion, what is the role of the humanities in responding to these challenges?
Yeah, it's a super important question, and the answer is it's a central role. So within Durham, I think you'll know that we've had a strong history in medical humanities, for example. So over 20 years now of work in the medical humanities with some extraordinary inspirational women leading some of these projects as well. I mean, my colleagues Jane McNaughton, Angela Woods, Corinne Saunders, and others. There's one example of actually work which has been ongoing over a longer period of time that tells us why it's important to think about a humanities-led approach that allows us to get at the experience of what it feels like to be ill in terms of some of the projects that they're thinking about at the moment, to experience breathlessness. There's a project which is very, very topical, of course, now on Life of Breath, which is all around the experience of breathlessness. Another very important and award-winning project there on hearing the voices. So providing ways of actually rethinking what it means to hear voices, which is not only then to pathologize and medicalize, but also to think about other ways of understanding what it means to pick up voice hearing. And of course that speaks to then big concerns and global concerns around mental health, which we know is a major issue, not only in this country, but certainly across the Western world and more broadly. So in terms of medical humanities, there's one clear example, but it goes broader than that. You know, my own work in the field of energy is part of a larger set of concerns around environmental humanities. We've got work in terms of thinking about digital transformation and the humanities-led approach there. What the humanities do there is humanities are all about habits and practices and beliefs and emotions and forms of perception and understanding, all of which are crucially important to think through people's motivations, desires for change, impulses and understandings that enable particular solutions to particular problems to be imagined as possible, and others not to be imagined as possible. So there's a large question. I guess one of the things I've been leading the faculty to be thinking about is what arts and humanities are for. What's the value of the arts and humanities? And we've got quite a strong statement we've been working on around this now. And perhaps you can go and look at our website and look at it on the website. But really, what we say is that we nurture thoughtful, critical, and engaged citizens for a rapidly changing and complex world. And what we can provide are tools for analysis, tools for interpretation, tools for expression, tools to discuss and compare. You can tell I'm reading this at the moment, but tools to discuss and compare models of human life and flourishing, tools crucially for imagining the future. We were talking about that. We do this through engaging the study of languages, of arts, cultures, philosophies, and texts that have shaped our world, because the way in which the world presents itself to us is mediated through these different forms, these different cultural forms. And as a faculty, I think we are committed to opening up new perspectives through attending to difference, to different times and places, to different cultures, and to different ways of thinking and seeing. And that lets us then ask difficult questions of the past and present alike, and also enable productive and innovative ways of imagining the future. So there's the pitch for what we do, and that's tied up to, I think, broader questions that are in place now around an understanding of the crucial role that the arts and humanities and social sciences indeed also play in shaping the world. There's an initiative called SHAPE, which was put in place by the British Academy, and it's there to communicate the value of the arts and humanities and the social sciences alongside then the natural sciences and the physical sciences in attending to some of these really pressing questions that impact upon us all.
Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. It certainly fills me with pride to be a part of the kind of humanities disciplines here in Durham. So yeah, thank you. And speaking of working in humanities and kind of being part of the Durham community, what would you say is the best piece of career advice that you have ever been given? And what advice would you then pass on to someone who's about to embark on their academic career?
Yeah, again, another really interesting question, isn't it? I think some of the best advice I had in my career was from my PhD supervisor, who was a very wise person, someone who'd been in academia for a long time by that stage. And one of the simplest pieces of advice there was simply around planning your work such that when you're applying for your next grant, or when you're putting your next project together, when you're writing your next project up, that in a sense you're including work that you've already done, which provides you then with the headroom to actually do some innovative thinking within a project which has been quite clearly defined and tightly defined. And I think I've tried to hold on to that as I've been thinking about developing my career, not always successfully, but I think it's a good and wise piece of advice there. What would I say to someone now? Know what you want to do in your career, and understand that an academic career does offer flexibility, but that it also demands flexibility. I think that would be the piece of advice. It sounds perhaps slightly enigmatic, but that was the advice that I came up with thinking that through.
No, it's certainly something that, especially with how the world is developing, is more and more true. So it's actually very, very good advice. So thank you. And finally, if you could speak to yourself at the age of 21, knowing everything you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a really interesting one, isn't it? I was thinking this one through. What advice would I give myself? I mean, partly, one of the things I wanted to say was that know that actually having kids is quite a good thing. And I think at 21, I might not have believed you if you told me that was going to be the case. But actually, you know, they combining having that side of my life, growing up with young people in my life alongside the academic career, has actually been very productive for me. So I think that's one of the things. But I think perhaps more seriously, what I would say is be confident to pursue your own course of action. I think going back to that sense of flexibility that we were just talking about there, embrace that flexibility. I think what I would say is there aren't wrong decisions. There are decisions that will take you down one route and not another, but they're not wrong decisions. They're simply different decisions. Don't be afraid to change direction and to take up opportunities as they present themselves. And I think crucially, actually, what I would say now is ensure that you know for yourself what success means, rather than working to someone else's imagination of what success might mean.
Oh, that's brilliant, actually. Very, very insightful. Thank you so much for taking the time and for answering our questions, and for giving us a chance to speak with you. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you about all of this, and really appreciate your time. So thank you for joining us.
I'm very, very delighted. Thank you very much for inviting me, Deirdre. Thank you for a great set of questions. So they're really interesting to just think through, actually, the answers to some of the questions that you posed there at the moment. And my thanks to you and all of your colleagues for putting this project in place, because it's an extraordinarily important one. Really delighted to see it coming together.